From the Oregon State University's Extension Service, you are listening to In the Woods with the Forestry and Natural Resources Program. This podcast brings the forest to listeners by sharing the stories and voices of forest scientists, land managers, and enthusiastic members of the public. Each episode, we will bring you research and science-based information that aims to offer some insight into what we know and are still learning about forest science and management. Stick around to discover a new topic related to forests on each episode.
All right. Welcome back, everyone, to In the Woods podcast, presented by the Forestry and Natural Resource Extension Program at Oregon State University. I'm Jacob Putney, Extension Agent in Baker and Grant counties, and your host for today's episode. I'm excited to be joined today by two Extension colleagues from Washington State, Patrick Shults and Justin O'Day. Patrick is an Extension Forestry Specialist. He holds a Master's and Bachelor's in Forestry, both from Michigan State University. Justin is an Associate Professor and Regional Agricultural Specialist. He holds a Master's in Agriculture from Montana State University. Patrick, Justin, thank you both so much for joining us today. I want to give you both a chance to introduce yourselves. So why don't we start with you, Patrick? Could you tell us a little bit about your background and your work with Washington State Extension?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jake. I started at WSU Extension back in 2018, came right from Michigan. I'm a forester by trade, so it's kind of fun to work with Justin because we come at this from different angles, him more agricultural, me more forestry. But I did study agroforestry in graduate school. So when I started a program, mostly in Southwest Washington, I was doing primarily forest stewardship kind of stuff, which I imagine is what a lot of what you do, a lot of outreach to forest owners, but then slowly started to integrate more kind of agroforestry stuff in. And now it's a significant part of what I do. It's not most of what I do, but projects like this with Justin have been a lot of fun and just exploring those alternative sources of income for forest owners. So I consider that a good part of my program now.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. I've worked together in the past, so it's great to have you here today for this episode. And it's here. Great to hear how your position's kind of evolved over time. Yeah. Okay, let's turn it over to you, Justin. Tell us a little about your work in Extension.
Yeah, so I've been at WSU since 2017, so right around when Patrick started. Before that, I was in New York State, also doing Extension. And my background's mostly centered around agriculture versus forestry, but I got introduced to producing mushrooms on logs through working on a farm that did shiitake mushrooms as part of their CSA. And so when I got here, got to know Patrick some, and we both had this interest in agroforestry, and approached Patrick about doing a project on shiitake mushrooms because I kept hearing there was interest in it. And nobody was really doing the work. So at least at the university level. So there was kind of a wide open space there for a need to be met. But most of my other program work is focused around trying to help farmers adapt to urbanization. And this is kind of one of those things. This is a specialty crop that kind of has a niche that can be used in that kind of context.
As Patrick and Justin both alluded to, today we're going to be talking a little bit about agroforestry, and specifically we'll dive into cultivating a well-known delicacy, the shiitake mushroom. So to kick us off, why don't we start with some background? Where did log-grown shiitake cultivation originate, and how has that practice evolved over time?
It originated in China, and they used to just take logs and make little cuts into them and try and rub literally the spores into them. So it was a pretty crude process that they started with, but the methods that we use today really have their roots in Japan. And Japan is the place globally where this is still practiced on a larger scale. And so this modernized version of producing shiitake on logs started in around the 1940s in Japan.
Is that where these mushrooms are native to?
They're native to Asia. Yeah. So not just Japan, but also China and Korea.
I'll add that as part of the grant we're currently on, a couple of years ago, Justin and I and some other colleagues got to go to Japan and actually tour some of these operations, some research farms, some forest owners that have been doing this for a long time. It was really fascinating to see just how it's very ingrained in the culture, right? It's been going on for centuries, obviously. And it was, it was incredibly informative to be able to do that. Very rewarding.
Yeah.
No, that's really cool. So kind of on that note, so what makes the shiitake mushroom itself such a popular choice for this cultivation, particularly for hobbyists or small woodland owners?
I'll try that one. So I think it's reliable. You can reliably force these logs to fruit in a way that for many other types of mushrooms, it's just more difficult. There's a lot of resources available, even though for a long time here, those resources were from the East Coast. Now, Justin and I have developed some resources more tailored to our region. It's just a mushroom that's pretty easy to cultivate compared to some of the other specialty mushrooms. And as I said, reliable. And also it's delicious. I mean, the shiitake mushroom is very versatile. You could do a lot with it. It dries and stores very easily. So there's just a lot of things that make it a popular choice. I will say, and Justin, I don't know if this is the case for you, but I do, every time people find out that I know a bit about shiitake cultivation, people inevitably ask me about oysters and lion's mane and all these others, that they want to do. So I could argue that those are arguably more popular in this region, at least. But those you can do at a hobby scale, but they just don't produce as reliably. And that's why we've been looking at shiitake primarily.
Yeah, and a lot of the work that we've been doing has been beyond hobby scale too. There's a lot of interest for hobbies, but growing for market, it's been a big focus of our program's work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the only thing I'd add to Patrick is that it generally yields pretty well, which kind of falls under the umbrella of reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the cultivation process. So just generally, what are the steps involved and what kind of supplies or equipment might someone need to get started?
Yeah. So I guess one of the draws for people is that it doesn't take a huge amount of capital or a huge amount of equipment to get going with this. It's generally like a low input process, or as economists like to say, it has low barriers to entry. And so that's one of the nice parts about it. So it's really good for new and beginning growers, first generation growers, either to do as a side business or as an addition to farm if they're already producing, or in Patrick's case, somebody that's producing timber, they just want to add a side business. Yeah. So there's not a ton of specialized equipment that's needed either. Like a lot of the time you'll have a lot of the things that you need already on a farm. I think the most difficult thing would be like if you're in like an urban apartment or something like that, and then, you partnered with somebody who had land, that would be more intensive of like an equipment buildup to get what you need. But most people are going to have a truck around, or maybe access to a trailer or a hatchback even that they could put logs in and move them around. They're going to have a chainsaw maybe for felling timber that you need for it. And I think like of all this, of the specialized equipment that you need, what's just called like an inoculation tool, which is what actually puts the shiitake mycelium in the wood. You need some kind of like high speed drill. We typically use like a modified angle grinder because it's very fast at drilling holes. And maybe I'm forgetting something here, Patrick, but
we got very creative in how we apply wax, because when you drill the holes in the log and you put the spawn in, you have to cover it with that kind of wax. We've tried there's a lot of different cheap options. Yeah. I like the turkey baster. A metal turkey baster full of hot wax works really well, personally.
Yeah, I like that version too.
I will say too, I do know the inoculation tool is cheap, right? You said it's like one of the only specialized things that you need to buy, and it's really not that much. But I do know a farmer who used it was like a medicine, it was like a pill plunger it wasn't a syringe exactly. It was like a pill plunger for cows, basically. Yeah. And and it was like the exact right size. And so he just put like a spring in it and it was plastic. I thought that was pretty creative.
Should have them send us a link to it so we could showcase it.
Yeah. I did take a picture somewhere. I'll have to send that to you.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think that's all the specialized equipment you need. Maybe I'd include this though, because we soak the logs partly to like rehydrate the logs, but also to force fruit. And that requires something like a stock tank. It usually is like the metal type stock tanks. And those are actually the biggest like financial investment you'll make if you've got like a chainsaw already and you've got a truck to move stuff around.
I have seen people get creative. I know you have too, Justin, like how to soak them, but the livestock tank is really unbeatable. It's very easy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really optimized for it in a way. As long as they don't
get a swimming pool handy.
I heard of people doing just a couple logs in their bathtub, but then it gets full of bark and all that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about these logs then. Which tree species are going to work best and which ones should be avoided for cultivating these?
Justin, you've done so much work with this. I think you should take that.
Yeah, so we've trialed a lot of different species. One of the main tree categories or tree like subsets that you need to avoid are any kind of conifer or softwood. It just doesn't work. The shiitake fungus can't digest it. It's just a totally different type of food for the shiitake fungus to eat, and it doesn't work. So you're looking mainly at broadleaf tree species, which in the Northwest, we're somewhat more limited in our variety of species that we have of broadleaves versus someplace like the Eastern United States or Japan. But the ones that we've generally advised growers against are Oregon ash. For some reason, the shiitake fungus just will not eat it. We've had shiitake bolts. Once a log is inoculated, we call it a bolt, just to get that out of the way. Okay. So we have these shiitake bolts of ash, and I think I'm 3 years deep on them right now. Not a single mushroom has come out of those ash logs.
Same here. Yeah. Nothing.
Yeah, Patrick. Yep. Exactly.
Is there any other research on other fraxinus species, or is?
Well, I don't know if research, but like
trial and error
on the East Coast, they advised against. They advised against fraxinus.
Yeah.
And then other ones to avoid are our second most abundant species is bigleaf maple. And shiitake will eat it. Like shiitake, in fact, it can yield well, but it's really variable. And the problem is that those logs lose too much moisture too easily. And what happens is you get a pretty big delay on when the shiitake fungus actually starts to fruit on those logs. And sometimes if you don't manage it, it may never fruit at all. But I always tell people I've had bigleaf maple. I think it's one of our bolts that's bigleaf maple is like our second highest yielding like single bolt, but it also has the highest number of logs that just never fruited at all.
Right.
All the things that we tried besides Oregon ash.
I know we both had logs that took 3 or 4 years to do anything, which is a long time to wait for some mushrooms, even if you're a hobbyist.
Yeah. Exactly. So we consider it not commercially viable for people that are wanting to grow for market. But, even if you're not, you're waiting a long time. I'm trying to think of any other species that are generally like a no-go.
I'm trying out some fruit trees this year.
Okay.
We'll see how they do. No data. And I don't know if you've done anything with fruit trees.
Not besides just feral cherry. Feral sweet cherry. We've done quite a bit with feral sweet cherry, and it yields like moderately low, but it's a really like robust bolt. It's very tough. It can take a lot of abuse. So it's a double-edged sword with that species. And I think it just doesn't yield as well. Mostly, I think, because mushrooms can't poke through the bark. It's got very tough bark on it. And I think that's maybe why, because birch also the mushrooms have trouble getting through, and they have the same sort of symptoms, even though birch initially is a lot more robust as far as yield goes. But the main like workhorse species in the Northwest is red alder. You just have to manage it well because it can lose moisture pretty quick. And moisture is a really key part of how you manage shiitake bolts viability over the long term and how you get it to start fruiting as early as possible. But yeah, red alder and then Gary oak or Oregon white oak. Those two are the major like workhorse species. They both work well. The only thing with Oregon white oak or Gary oak is that it takes about 18 months to 2 years to begin to start fruiting.
Oh,
Once it starts going, it yields well, but it takes a while because it's such a dense wood.
Yeah.
And then in our trials, one of like the up and coming all-stars appears to be common hazel, not the native species. The native species is kind of iffy, but the cultivated non-native hazelnut, filbert wood works really well. It's sort of almost like a unicorn combination of bark that really, really helps keep the integrity of the log over the long term, but is not so tough that the mushrooms can't poke through. Yeah, there's a bunch of different species that will work. It's just that maybe those three and then like birch initially in the first 2 years or so works really well too. Yeah.
I was just going to say real quick that in terms of size that you're looking for, you're generally wanting like a 4 to 6 inch diameter, and then bolts we typically recommend about 4 feet. That's just great for moisture management and for saving your back. Like heavier logs will do, but they're not going to produce much more than a 4 to 6 inch diameter. So with hazelnut, that is one of the challenges. I had a really hard time finding hazel that was sufficient diameter, and you could try smaller stuff, but it'll dry out more quickly generally. But yeah, and then I will also add Oregon oak for us Washingtonians is a little bit harder to find, especially north of where Justin's at. And and sometimes can be protected too. So yeah, you do have to consider that as well.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly.
So let's talk about the inoculation process. Can you kind of walk me through that and what that looks like? So you have your bolt and you're ready to inoculate. What does that look like?
Yeah. You start with your log.
The log before the bolt. Sorry.
From log to bolt.
Before the bolt.
Log before the bolt.
People get confused, and I even interchange them sometimes. So you have your log. So you've got your 4 to 6 inch diameter log, and we usually use a 4 foot long bolt, and we use 4 feet. It's a complicated answer to why 4 feet, but 4 foot is what we use for our system, and it works throughout the whole process really well. And what you need to do is essentially you insert mycelium, which is actually the vegetative part of the shiitake fungus. It's not spores, because spores are going to produce a random strain. Like certain plants do that. Like if you let them go to seed, they'll always produce a different variety. So what you do with using mycelium is you assure that the strain is going to be true to type. You're going to know what to expect. And usually what the mycelium comes in is it's like sawdust it's been colonized by the shiitake fungus. And what we do is we drill holes in the log into the sapwood, because the sapwood is where the shiitake fungus will grow. And then you insert the spawn that contains the mycelium into the hole. And then we cap it off with melted wax. And what that does is it prevents the spawn from drying out, and it prevents the log from also drying. And it also adds as a sort of a barrier from other like feral or weedy fungi species that could have otherwise got into the log through that injury. And once your log isn't entirely inoculated, then it is a shiitake bolt.
The timing is also really important. And I
Yeah.
think maybe important now because I don't know when this podcast is going to come out, but it could work out really well for some folks to try this out themselves because you really want to. Well, we didn't mention this, but you need fresh logs. You don't want to go and pick up a log just that's been laying on the ground in the woods because it may have already been inoculated with all kinds of other fungi, and also it's probably dried out quite a bit. So we're felling our own trees, and we're using small diameter wood, so it's very conducive to things like thinning. I always joke every forest owner in Washington has some red alder that needs some thinning. So this really works. So we do that in late February, which is a really good time because the sap's not running yet in the tree. So the bark stays intact, which is really important. There's lots of carbohydrates in the tree still. So we fell those late February. We let them sit for 6 weeks. And then we come out and buck them up into 4-foot lengths and get them over to where we're going to inoculate them, like Justin described. So I imagine some folks could be listening to this right now and thinking about trying it out for themselves this year. It's a really good time.
Yeah. Yep.
Why do you let them sit for 6 weeks?
Because the
Yeah.
shiitake fungus is a fungus that eats dead things.
Ah.
And so the tree has to die back. And so you give it a little period of time in order to do that. And by the time it starts to actually die, the fungus is just really ready to invade. And in Japan, they do it for a moisture reason too, but our context is different. So it's not really for that. It's more to just let the tree die back a little bit.
Yeah, that was interesting to hear that.
Yeah.
And the timing also works out too, so that you're inoculating right as the temperature's starting to warm up. And as Justin said, it just really it's all about giving the shiitake a head start, basically, over other things that want to get into the log. Because it's not native, but it's certainly not invasive, and it's not going to outcompete most of our native fungi.
Yeah, it's almost like a warm weather fungus in a way. Like it will fruit in cooler weather, but most of its growth is like between 70 to 80 degrees.
Yeah.
So it's unique in that way. And I mean, I should add too, like I've never seen shiitake, if you get it in the log, just that bulk addition of mycelium to the log to inoculate it, and the shiitake fungus is very competitive. Though at the same time, I've never seen like a feral shiitake mushroom come up around or what we call a laying yard, which is where we produce shiitake in the woods.
So thinking about your standard 4-foot log, how much of this spawn would you inoculate it with? Like how many holes are we drilling?
Yeah. We use a pretty standard method. So you're going to make a row of holes that are about 4 inches apart along the length of the log, and then about 2 inches between the rows. And it's going to work out to 2 to 3 because you're never going to be able to fit the exact amount of rows because there's different sizes of the log. So I don't know what that works out to off the top of my head. I think you can get through about 12 to 15 logs.
Be like 12 holes per row, roughly.
Yeah, something like that.
It doesn't have to be exact. I was just curious.
And then a
like
row for each day. Oh, we have to figure it out because he said it. And now I can't let me.
Somebody's going to have to do the math.
Or data driven.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's around 15 logs you can get through, depending on the size of the log, with a single 5.5 pound bag, which is a pretty common standard of commercial spawn that you can buy.
A lot of people too immediately go to the little wooden dowels. We call those plugs. Plug spawn.
Yeah.
And just more about the disadvantage of those, but it usually takes a longer spawn run. That's one of the bigger things, is that it just takes a little bit longer for the log to get fully colonized, and they are slightly more expensive as well. So if you're doing it in bulk, the sawdust spawn that we use in inoculation tools tends to be more effective.
In Japan, okay, let me back up. So in the Northwest, at least a lot of the growers that we're working with, they're interested in fresh market shiitake. And in Japan, they use a very similar inoculation rate and style. So they'll use sawdust spawn and they'll at the same rate that we do. A lot of the bolts that use plug spawn are in a different type of system in Japan that are targeted towards dried shiitake. It's like a lower input, larger scale option.
Yeah.
And our context is just different. Like our market context is just different here. So that's why we really focus on the sawdust spawn method with a bit of a higher rate. And I think it takes an extra 30% of time for plug spawn to colonize a log, because typically it's added at a lower inoculation rate. So there's a less number of holes, and the dowel's actually a smaller hole than you would use with sawdust spawn.
So I want to go back to something that Patrick mentioned, the spawn run. Could you tell us a little bit about that and why it's so important to this process?
Yeah, it takes place right after what Justin described as the inoculation process. So once you've got all your holes drilled, filled with spawn, waxed over nice and good, that's basically when the spawn run starts. And it's a period of about 12 to 18 months, really depending on the variety of the shiitake, what substrate you're working with, even weather conditions, that kind of thing. That takes for the fungus to basically colonize the log, move through and fully inoculate, achieve dominance over certainly any non-native fungi to get to a point where it could then start to create fruiting bodies. So a lot of people do think that they're going to be able to inoculate in April and then get some mushrooms that summer. That's unfortunately not the case. But if you do everything right, you should be able to get some the following summer. So I do really encourage. That's why it's always nice to get in while the getting's good. You put a little investment in, and those logs last a while too.
I generally think of them as they're almost like a perennial crop in a way. It's like you put a bunch of time in the beginning. There's a big glut of work in the beginning, and then you wait. But it's going to keep producing for 3 to 5 years. Even longer, doing it like for a hobby. You can keep the log around for longer.
Wow.
Yeah, the logs we did in 2019, we haven't talked since the last harvest season. I think Justin, but I have 6-year-old logs that are still producing, which is just, it's crazy.
I retired my 5-year-old bolts, but I noticed that some of them were still,
It's crazy.
putting up like spontaneous mushrooms after a rain or something like that.
It's something too where definitely a commercial producer would do this, but even a hobbyist would probably inoculate logs every year just to kind of keep that going, making sure they have that longevity and always have some colonized logs ready to produce.
Yeah. And also that early period of production, like the first 2 years or so, you're going to get bigger yields. It's going to decline over time.
Yeah.
As the fungus uses up readily available food and has to start scrounging around for more food in the log in order to produce.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to ask next, actually, is that kind of harvesting process. So 12 to 18 months starting to produce. What do those kind of yields look like? And you said they start to decline over time, but kind of initially for those first 2 years, like what would a 4-foot bolt produce?
Yeah. So the fruiting process, so after your spawn run period, the log should be about ready to fruit within 12 to 18, depending on things, especially if you're using like Oregon oak, then it's going to be like 2 years, maybe. It's going to be able to start producing. And one of the nice parts about shiitake, one of the actually key aspects from like a commercial standpoint, is that you can do this thing called forced fruiting, which some people have probably seen, which is where you immerse the log in cold water for a period of time. We usually use 24 hours as a standard amount of time. And what that'll do is it'll actually incite the shiitake fungus to fruit. And so that's what really, it makes the harvest a lot more reliable and a lot more like under control as far as controlling quality goes. And we typically do that 3 times a season, with about a 7 to 8 week gap in between where the log is resting, as they call it, is getting ready to be able to fruit again. And so it's typically in very early June or late May. And then about the third week of July, and then about the second week of September is the general schedule that we use. And it all depends too on the strain that you have. There's a couple different strain types. There's warm weather strains, and then there's wide range strains, and then there's cold weather strains.
Yeah, it gets pretty complicated.
It's a little
But
complicated. Yeah.
And in terms of yield, it obviously varies, especially in that first year, if you're not getting all 3 harvests. And then again, later, as Justin pointed out, it'll taper off. But we expect somewhere between a half a pound and maybe a pound on the high end per log per summer.
Yeah, early on. I've done a 4-year average on well-managed alder equaled 0.37 pounds of shiitake per log per harvest. So that's a total of 12 harvests worth. Yeah, a little over a pound. In the beginning, it's going to be more. It's going to vary. A lot of times, your bolt will get what I call like a hangover. Like it has a really bark busting like yield. It might not fruit like the rest of the season.
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah,
way to put it.
Yeah. There's other times you'll just get like a quarter to a half pound per time, or it just really depends.
And that's pretty comparable too with what
East Coast and Japan.
Yeah, East Coast and Japan. Yeah, we're really happy with that.
Yeah. Yep.
So for folks that are interested in getting started, what would you say are some of the biggest lessons or lessons learned for first-time growers?
One of the things that people have to maybe keep in mind is this is a method that's not really suited for large scale. So people can be thinking about that it's more suitable for a small scale context because you can't really scale it up that well. And even though they do it on a large scale in Japan, just their market context in Japan is very different. And the fact that it's very ingrained in the culture and people know how to do it and who knows the history of it and all these things. So here it's really most intended, most suitable for smaller scale and for something to add to a business you already have maybe. Some other aspects that I was thinking of is people tend to have trouble if they don't have timber on site, if they don't already have a forest where they can get their timber from.
Yeah.
It's complicated to figure out where you're going to get your timber from. It's one of the bottlenecks. And then something that people tend to have to get used to is people are most used to treating timber of that size like firewood, like throwing it around. And it's very different for this context of growing mushrooms on because you really need to keep the bark intact because the bark is very important to the long-term viability of the log. So it's hard to get people used to treating it better throughout the whole process of when you have that log. You really can't be throwing it around and banging it up, especially with something like alder that has brittle bark. It takes away from the long-term viability of the log. And then I was going to say too that making sure that you have a suitable site and an inoculation site as well that are like in close proximity, because some people get overwhelmed with the number of logs that they get and they figure out that they can't get water to their site, or they can't get electricity to their site, or they have trouble moving them around as they need to as well. And then, are there other things that you're thinking of too, Patrick?
You touched on a lot of them. I think the big kind of broad one I would say is just get used to thinking in terms of moisture. Just be thinking about elements that are going to dry out your logs short-term, long-term. It's especially important during the spawn run to be thinking about that. But little things like, Justin, I know you experienced this when you were transporting logs. the first time you didn't cover them, and they lost a lot of moisture going on like a 20-minute ride down the highway.
Yeah.
So you just got to be really, our biggest hurdle in this region, and the reason many hobbyists have failed, is because we have these really dry summers compared to the Midwest, where it's very humid and they get periodic rains. We don't have that. So we have to be really thinking about moisture management.
Yeah. We developed a couple methods that we use now.
That's the other just broad piece I'd say, because it can be really easy to kind of hear this and be like, oh, well, I'm just gonna try it. I don't need to like read these instructions very carefully. I'm guilty of that as anyone is. But I would just say, like, really read these guidance that we've come up with closely, even for a hobbyist, because you don't want to invest all that time only to find out a year later that this isn't going to work. They're not going to yield, or you're going to have to wait a really long time, right? Because that's the other consequence. So, and it's not a ton of stuff, but it's like you said, Justin, some really important tips and tricks that are unique to our region.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
We're nearing the end here, but I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. So do either of you have any parting thoughts on cultivating shiitake mushrooms, or just agroforestry in general? Or any of your cool projects that either of you are working on?
I'll just say that there's a lot of things like this. This shiitake falls under the category of forest farming, which is just alternative ways to manage for non-timber forest products. And like I said earlier, it's becoming a bigger part of my program. And I know there's a lot of people out there that are excited about those opportunities, whether for personal use or maybe scaling up. So I hope they consider extension a resource, and we love to hear what people are interested in. And I am particularly interested in those folks that have tried something like this unique and have had successes or failures. So I'm always interested to hear from people that are doing it. It's hard to track them down sometimes.
Yeah. Maybe I'd add just that there's some aspects to this, that the fact that it really doesn't take a lot of forested space to produce mushrooms on. So the land impact is pretty small. Even though, for instance, like the soaking, you're filling up this giant tank in front of you, and that's a lot of water, right? But if you look at it compared to growing something in a field, a crop in a field, and irrigating with 1 inch of water, it's vastly lower water use with the shiitake production method in the forest like this. And it's not displacing farmland. So it's kind of like this really nice, like little niche side thing that people up until now really aren't doing. One other sort of almost like non-quantifiable aspect is that like just like the sheer profit margin alone on this method isn't necessarily a big cash cow. Right? You can make money on it, but it's not a huge money maker. But a lot of the growers that I've interviewed that we've been working with as they start up this process, they just enjoy the process of doing it. They like the opportunity to work in the woods and see the mushrooms grow. And just, if I'm working with a farmer who's growing crops out in a field, during the heat of the summer, it's nice to just shift in the middle of the day and go into the woods and like work in a cool place and still be working towards your end goal, which is your business of producing food and producing for your farm.
Very rewarding process to see those logs start to fruit.
Yeah.
Oh, I bet. Especially after waiting for a year and a half, 2 years.
One of the hardest parts that people have, for sure. Gotta wait.
Patrick, Justin, I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. Speaking for myself, I didn't realize how much went into this process as I was preparing for this today. I was just fascinated with kind of everything that goes into this. So I want to thank you for taking the time to walk me through it. I know we discussed a lot today, so if any questions came up while you were listening, or if you'd like to learn more, please drop us a comment or send us a message on our website. Before we wrap up here, though, we conclude each episode with what we call our lightning round, or a few questions that we ask each of our guests. So, Patrick, let's start with you first. The first question, I know that we're talking about mushrooms today, but what is your favorite tree?
I feel guilty not saying shiitake. Yeah. I personally, I love Oregon oak. I wish it was just more present where I'm at up in Olympia. I love the form of it. I love seeing a big old one, knowing how long it took to get there because it is pretty slow growing. So I'm all about Oregon oak.
I grew up in the Willamette Valley, so I was privileged in that I had a lot of it around. All right. So the second question is, what is the most interesting thing you bring with you in the field?
Yeah, I got just like a standard cruising vest. I guess the answer to this would be, especially this time of year, because one of the other projects I have is with bigleaf maple syrup. And so when I go into the field to do some sugaring, I have a totally different vest. In fact, it's like a big heavy apron that has all kinds of stuff, fittings, tubing, pliers, nothing you would find in a forestry vest for sure, except maybe a pruning saw. So maybe that, my sugaring vest.
No, that's good. And then lastly, what resources would you recommend for our listeners if they're interested in learning more about cultivating shiitake mushrooms or other kind of agroforestry related topics?
I'll let Justin talk about what shiitake specific resources are available, and then I'll just give some tips for some like broader agroforestry resources. So I just developed an online toolkit called the Working Riparian Lands Program, which is basically taking some of these agroforestry concepts and applying them to riparian buffers where we're really limited in how we can manage, and hopefully that create income for forest owners and farmers. And so that's the Working Riparian Land Program. And then I'll also plug a nonprofit that I work really closely with up here in Washington called Agroforestry Northwest, which is doing a lot of work to advance agroforestry in the region. So yeah, more broad, less related to shiitake, but good resources.
No, that's great. Thank you, Patrick. Justin, let's turn it over to you. Same questions. Again, I added, what is your favorite tree? But it's okay if you had the same one.
Maybe like Pacific Madrone. And most interesting thing that I bring with me to the field, I do a lot of in-field like agriculture work too. And probably the thing that draws the most attention is that we have a 1954 John Deere combine. Ooh. So it's like a big old behemoth that we drive around the farm that I use probably once a season. And then
that's cool.
If I was thinking with shiitake wise, I have a sort of a little mirror on a stick, like an automotive mirror that we use for when we harvest shiitake mushrooms. It was a little thing that I picked up in Japan from a grower. They use it to see how open the cap of the mushroom is to see when it's ripe. It's hard to look underneath. So I just have this little mirror that is really sped up the process.
No, and then lastly is just what resources might you recommend for folks?
So we developed a website for this, and it's like an ongoing thing. We keep adding to it and refining it, but it's pnwforestmushroomgrowers.net. There's a lot of pictures and a couple schematics and trying to make it as accessible as possible for people to learn from. And then I think if you're going to look in some more like in-depth information just about shiitake, there's a book that's out of print. It's by Paul Prasibowicz and John Donahue. It's called The Shiitake Grower's Handbook.
So, well, again, thank you both for being here today. I definitely learned a lot. This topic is certainly out of my wheelhouse, but it was very interesting to hear both of you talk about this process and how folks could get started. With that, this concludes another episode of In the Woods. Thank you all so much for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will see you all next time. Bye, everyone.
The In the Woods podcast is produced by Lauren Grand, Jacob Putney, and Scott Levengood, who are all members of the Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension team. Other members of the team who've been involved in the podcast include Carrie Berger, Jason O'Brien, and Stephen Fitzgerald. Episodes are edited and produced by Carrie Cantrell. Music for In the Woods was composed by Jeffrey Heino, and graphic design was created by Christina Freihoff. Funding for In the Woods is provided by Oregon State University Forestry and Natural Resources Extension, the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and the USDA Renewable Resources Extension Act funding. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we can't wait to talk to you again next month. Until then, what's in your woods?